Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Each Bring a Poem. I am really excited today to have Elisa Albo with me. Welcome, Elisa.
Hi, Yael. So wonderful to be here.
Wonderful to have you, and let me introduce you. Elisa Albo is an award-winning professor of composition, literature, ESL, and creative writing at Broward College, a contributing editor of Grab, Poets and Writers on Sexual Harassment and Power and Healing. Her poetry chapbooks are Passage to America, based on her family immigrant story, and Each Day More, a collection of elegies. Her poems have appeared in numerous journals and anthologies, including Alimentum, Bomb, Crab, Orchard Review, Irresistible Appetites, MiPoesias, Notre Dame Review, Poetry Superhighway, SWWIM Every, Two Countries, U.S. Daughters and Sons of Immigrant Parents, and Vinegar and Char. Nominated in 2021 for a Best of the Net award, she is an associate editor for the South Florida Poetry Journal and co-produces the Seahawk Writing Conference at Broward College, where she also teaches a food-themed film and literature course. Born in Havana, she lives with her family in Fort Lauderdale. Welcome, Elisa. I'm so excited to have you here.
Thank you, Yael. I'm so happy to be here. This is a wonderful thing that you're doing with this podcast, and I'm really excited to be part of it.
Well, I'm not going to do like last time. I'm going to introduce myself where I forgot and I
Yes.
just like threw that in at the end. So my name is Yael Aldana, and I'm a poet and writer living in South Florida, and I teach creative writing at Florida International University. I'm also associate editor at West Trade Review, and I'm published here and there. And you can find out more about me at yaelaldana.com. So I'm especially excited to have you here because I know we were a little bit delayed because you got COVID.
Yes.
And you were one of the ones that did not get COVID until now.
Yes.
How
I'm
was that for you?
um well, not fun. Mostly because it's not just like getting a cold. It's, my husband had to I made him sleep on the other side of the room of the house actually, and my daughter and he, are on the other side of the house. Not a very big house, by the way, with a kitchen in the middle, so everybody's coming, and so I made them wear a mask in the house, and it just makes it difficult, and it was just ironic because we had just gone on family vacation, and I actually made them wear masks in the airport and on the plane, except that they didn't on the way home, but they did on the way up. And then, we were fine, and I was fine until the last day. Our flights were delayed, and we came back on a Sunday night. And the next day, I had like a weird sneezing thing, but I thought, okay, I get allergies sometimes or whatever. And then on Tuesday, all the symptoms like rained down on me at the same time. So there was fever and sore throat and lots of sneezing, and it was mostly a head cold. I got very congested. It was mostly a head cold. I don't think it went very much into my lungs, um, but it was annoying, and I had a lot of symptoms for a good week or a little bit more, and then lingering. And I didn't test negative for like 12 or 13 days. So it took almost 2 weeks. My husband was like, test yourself, test yourself. he, he wanted to come back from, his exile on the other side of the house. But, it was what it was. And I imagine at some point it'll make its way into some writing, but we'll see. I didn't feel much like doing anything. I mostly read and rested and watched a lot of series.
So your other family members, they didn't get it?
No, they've all had it. My husband had it last summer, which right before a trip to New York City, which we didn't go. So This was actually the first time I've flown in over 3 years, almost 4. And so we didn't get to go because he got it. And my daughter had it, I think last December. And my other daughter is pretty sure she's had it a couple times at school, away at school, but I'm not sure she ever tested, but she's pretty sure she's had it a couple of times, and I'm pretty sure she's had it too. So, but we probably all need to wait for the fall to get boosted, they say, because there's going to be a new one coming out to sort of cover everything that's coming out. Yeah, and there's a little surge going on now, so we do need to be more careful. And I've been seeing more people out and about masking at doctors' offices and other places. So
yeah, you guys that did not get it, are you getting it now?
yeah, yes, exactly.
So
exactly.
that's really, you thought you made it through and
Right.
would get it, but no,
Right.
it's still going. And I know that we're both starting our semesters next week. We teach at different schools. So I'm really excited to be doing this before we hit the full frenzy of school, commuting and everything. And my son turns 18 today.
Yay,
And
happy birthday.
yeah, he's milking it for everything he's worth.
Everything
it's worth. And I said to him, because we had originally scheduled this before, but you got COVID, so we postponed it. And when you emailed me, I was really excited. So I said yes right away, but I forgot it was his birthday.
Oh.
So I said to him, I said, honey, I have a podcast. And he's like, well, cancel it.
We could have moved it, I guess, but
no, he's fine. So, he's looking forward to, we have this certain routine. Like he goes to Chili's and he gets like whoever's birthday it is, he goes to Chili's, whether it's me, his father, or his birthday, and he gets the exploding lava cake, whatever.
Oh, wow.
And he gets an ice cream cake. So when it was my birthday, I said, okay, I'm gonna go get a cake from Whole Foods. He's like, but I want an ice cream. I'm like, that's too bad, Jordan. It's my birthday. But yeah, he's very much a typical teenager, but I was realizing that pretty much 10 years he's had responsibility to help to care for his father, because 10 years ago, his father had a bout with encephalitis, brain encephalitis.
Thanks.
And what that is, for people that don't know, it's like a bleed on the brain, and it's very similar to a stroke. So the symptoms are basically of a stroke. Wow. And since then, his father's, been compromised, and, he's about 80%. You would never tell. He's, always carrying on, and, but he's had health issues from then. And it's been Jordan's responsibility, even as an 8-year-old, to help watch his father. I remember I got him his first cell phone at 8. And the reason was, like, if your dad gets in the car, because we hid the keys because he was not supposed to be driving,
right,
call me at work. So, that's a lot
for
a child. And he's lived with that responsibility. And he's done well. And, we're celebrating him becoming an adult, but also really importantly is he can help make decisions for his dad if I'm not there.
Sure.
Yep. So I'll give him his lava cake.
Of course.
And all the rest of it. He's starting FAU, Florida International University. And he says to me, there's an assignment here for like 1,000 words. I'm like, yes. He's like, that's a lot of words. He's like, is this going to be like once a month? Like, no, it's going to be like once a week.
Yeah. Welcome to college.
He couldn't comprehend it. I did not say, I told you. Right. But so right after this, we're gonna head out to Chili's and start the this celebration. So I'm really eager to hear the poem or poems you picked.
Okay. So I chose a poem by Sharon Olds from her second book, The Dead and the Living. And we can talk after why I chose this and its impact and things like that. But it was a kind of a beginning, and so I thought this would be a good one for us to start with.
Absolutely.
Okay, so the poem is called Photograph of the Girl. The girl sits on the hard ground, the dry pan of Russia, in the drought of 1921, stunned, eyes closed, mouth open, raw hot wind blowing, sand in her face. Hunger and puberty are taking her together. She leans on a sack, layers of clothes fluttering in the heat. The new radius of her arm curved. She cannot be not beautiful, but she is starving. Each day she grows thinner, and her bones grow longer, porous. The caption says she is going to starve to death that winter with millions of others. Deep in her body, the ovaries let out her first eggs, golden as drops of grain.
Wow, that is a visceral poem. So why did you end up choosing that?
Well, I chose it for many reasons. First of all, when I got into the MFA program at FIU, I was in the very first class. I was in my late 20s, and I was just starting. I was going through a lot of changes. I'd had a brief marriage. I actually got divorced, I think, while I was in the program, the first couple of years. And when I heard that there was going to be an MFA program at FIU, I had always written, as I remember writing in middle school, and I remember cleaning out my locker, finding a notebook of things I'd written and thinking, no, I don't need this, and I tossed it. I wish I hadn't tossed it, but I did. And then writing in high school, I wrote some poems, things I'm sure I would absolutely die of embarrassment of. If I probably have a couple somewhere. But then when I got to college, my second year, I transferred to UF, and I took a poetry class, a workshop, and I was writing. I would write, and I was super inspired by this class. Almost not to the professor's chagrin, but we had certain assignments like bring in a poem with copies every other week, and I was turning in like 2 or 3 a week. I was just like really inspired. And he didn't read mine all the time, of course, because there were 20 students in the class, but he did one day actually come in with a stack, and we would turn them in anonymously to him at his office. So you never knew who you were reading. And we would sit in a circle and we would, workshop the poems. And one day he came in with this huge stack and he said, today we're going to read all the poems of one student. And they were all my poems. And that,
Wow.
I just couldn't, it just blew me away. And of course, and I'm here trying to pretend they're not mine also, like making comments, because I was like embarrassed too. But that was just a wonderful boost. And things just happened that I might bring up a little bit later also. But things like I remember sitting on this low wall between the two main libraries on campus one day, and he walked by, and without even saying hello, I said, I just wrote a poem. And he sat down next to me. He looked at it. He helped me he went through and kind of did some editing. And then he said, go ahead and revise that, but make copies of your original and your revision and bring it to class. And then he left. And I didn't know it at the time, but that was an instant lesson that he had created for the class. And I tightened it, revised the poem and used a lot of what, he had done and brought that to class. And so I had that experience, but pretty much I was reading, things like Frost and, Eliot and other poems like that. I wasn't really reading contemporary poets. I know, even in his class, when I left school, I asked him, what should I read? And he told me two. He said, Anthony Hecht, which I read, but didn't have like such a huge impact. But he also told me Elizabeth Bishop. And that had, she had a huge impact. But again, like through my 20s, yeah, I read her and was just kind of writing on my own. How I got accepted into the MFA program on the basis of those little poems, that I turned in, I will never know. I think I was a guinea pig. Like they weren't even sure that they wanted to do poetry, which seems insane now. But they did accept me in that first class of 9 students. And the first class was with Jim Hall, and who had published 3 books of poetry before he did any novels. And this was the first poem that we read in that first class, which eviscerated my first poem in that class. It was like so sentimental and this and that. They literally eviscerated it. I remember I walked out of the classroom and burst into tears. And then I bucked up and got on with it, but it was a real kind of trial by fire,
Absolutely.
But this poem was the first one we read and it blew me away. I didn't know that, that you could write like that. I didn't know that it was just so the narrative, the imagery, the ekphrastic nature of it, which I had no idea what that was at the time, but that you could write, because I guess what I was writing were just things coming from my own experience. I wasn't really looking outside that much. I mean, I remember a poem I'd written about my aunt, who was a smoker for 40 years in Spain and died of lung cancer. And when I was 13, I asked her for a cigarette and she immediately handed it over to me. I mean, she never had children and she had like her own way of being with us. And so it was all kind of personal stuff, So this poem was not personal, and it was just very clear. When it was both concrete but also had abstract, language in it. And I can go through it and talk. Just there were many things about it that that just blew me away. I didn't know it like gave me a way to start, a way to write other things and to move out of myself and start writing about the world, which is pretty much what I write about, my family immigrant story, and I write a lot of elegies, but I also write a lot about, the wars and gun violence and children who are left in hot cars in South Florida. I have what I call my NPR poems, I will hear something. In fact, my first poem that I don't know if it was the first poem I got published. It might have been. I won some little contest in the original version of the South Florida Poetry Review many years ago, like in the early 90s. Was a poem I heard a description, because they're so descriptive on NPR, they go into detail. And it was a poem about an anniversary of when the Germans went into Poland. And they were describing the tanks And I'm describing the tanks and how they look like black crabs coming into, you know, into the city. And they talked a lot about horses, because people were pulling carts with horses, and what happened to the horses. And it was all just very, you know, vivid and descriptive. And I would say, you know, with Sharon Olds and then, you know, what proceeded from that, I just became very much about the image, just writing, you know, just that's how it begins for me. It's never with an idea. It's always an image, you know, and not just a visual image, but just an image. It can even be, you know, a scent or a sound or something, but it all begins, I think most of it begins from imagery for me, and a lot of that in my mind. So
Well, in that poem, what happens for me is that it creates so much empathy, you
yes,
know,
yes,
for that girl, and she's creating this image of her in girlhood, that she's a girl, and you know, she's lovely, but yet this is what she's going through at that moment.
yes,
um and then, you know, that she's starving, so it's, you know, it's like girlhood interrupted,
exactly.
um and caught in war, which I assume is the context of that. But just to put you in someone else's experience so completely,
Mhm.
you know, and then it's like she sort of pulls out and she's like, oh yes, this is a photograph, you know, and the caption says, you know, so there's a
Right.
lot of layers
Yes.
um going on here, and I just like completely, it's like one of these stories that a relative starts to tell you, and then you're completely
Exactly.
wrapped, caught in it, and then you're like, well, what happened to the girl, you know, because in the movies Liam Neeson will come and save her or something,
Right.
you know,
Right.
but that's not
Right.
life.
Right. Right. Absolutely. I mean, beginning with the title, you know, another thing I learned a lot from Sharon Olds is about titling, and also from many of my professors, you know, this idea that you can put information, use the title to put information that you don't have to put in the poem, you know, to set your context, to just, you know, the title does that. Whenever I, you know, when I teach creative writing, I don't allow any untitles. You know, they have to have a title, because I feel like that just really, you know, forces you or helps you to you know, to sort of distill, you know, what this is, or where you want to start, or the context for the reader. So, you know, it's very simple: photograph of the girl. And this whole section of her book, which is this first section of, you know, poems for the, you know, the book is called The Dead and the Living, and the first part is poems for the dead, and the second is for the living. But within that first part, there's poems, they're public and private. And these are all the public poems. And I, you know, have ended up writing a lot of this kind of poem. But her titles are, for example, the next poem, and this is the second poem of this section. The first one is called Ideographs, and then parenthetically, like an epigram, is a photograph of China, 1905. And she describes that. The one after this one is called Race Riot Tulsa, 1921. So you know, all of these end up being, you know, we might call ekphrastic, and she's using um, the titles. The next one is Portrait of a Child, with, you know, a more specific epigraph of where it is and when it is, and it continues, and even something like, she has this poem I love in here, called The Death of Marilyn Monroe. And that's another thing about, you know, the photograph of the girl and all these poems, is what it, the imagination that it uses, how you can use your imagination, you know, to write what happened. And we know that it's not necessarily exactly what happened, but it's what probably happened and how it may have happened. And that's how, you know, a lot of the poems that I've written about, like my family immigrant story, for example, yes, I've talked to family and, you know, but there are so many things that I just imagined, you know. I have a long poem called What Memory Hears, about sort of the family and before Cuba and in Cuba and how they left Cuba. And it just begins at my townhouse door in North Miami Beach, because it's a way that Young Lee begins a certain poem. And when I read his poem, it gave me just a window into starting to write about about what I eventually wrote about. And in The Death of Marilyn Monroe, she's basically imagining the ambulance drivers having to, you know, put her body in the ambulance and what happened to them because of them having to pick up Marilyn Monroe, that they were never the same, that they went out for a drink, that they started having problems. It just becomes a whole imaginary sort of, but it makes so much sense. To me, it's that it brings back that idiom that I don't know, or that saying that I don't know if it's only for, I don't think it's only for fiction, but I've heard it for fiction, which is that your allegiance is not to the facts, but to the truth, you know,
Yes.
to the truth of it. And what's really interesting about the Marilyn Monroe poem also, I don't know if you're familiar with it. Are you familiar?
I've heard of it.
Okay, so this is how it ends. About one of them, that even death seemed different to him, a place where she would be waiting. And one found himself standing at night in the doorway to a room of sleep, listening to a woman breathing, just an ordinary woman breathing. I don't know if you recall that, but that is the name of one of Julie Marie Wade's books.
Yes, yes.
I
have that book.
Woman. Yes, just an ordinary woman breathing.
I see you, Julie.
When I reread that recently, I went, "Oh my gosh!" You know, I was there. You know.
Yes.
Yeah. But it's just such a, you know, work of imagination, and there's so much that, you know, it takes a lot. But once you get you know, moving on it, that's, you know, the details come. And she, you know, in this in Photograph of the Girl, you know, there's the narrative, there are the facts, and then, like I said, there's the active imagination. And what you said is of empathy. That was something that also, you know, really became, it just showed me how to bring my empathy out, you know, how to show it in writing as well. You know, you get the facts at the beginning. The girl sits on the hard ground, but even that, you have to imagine it is hard, you know, you have to imagine that. But there's a drought, and you know, the drought makes what it makes the ground do. The dry pan of Russia in the drought of 1921. And then just the use of the word stunned. Stunned, you know, I was stunned by stunned. It was just, you know, it must be her look, but you know what she looks like. Her eyes are closed, her mouth is open, raw hot wind blowing sand in her face. And then you get the abstract again. Hunger and the imagination, hunger and puberty are taking her together. And we don't know exactly how old this girl is, but she must look like she's 12 or 13 or something like that. Hunger and puberty are taking her together. And then you get more of what you can see. She leans on a sack, layers of clothes fluttering in the heat. Again, you're imagining, though, the heat and what is happening to her body, the new radius of her arm curved. You're going through puberty, you're growing, you get kind of lanky, you know, kids, boys and girls sometimes grow tall and skinny, and the way they change. And then this line, you know, it took me years to learn to be able to use a line like this. She cannot be not beautiful, but she is. There's so much about that line. She cannot be not beautiful. Just the negative aspect of that, just saying that, using the word beautiful, you're saying, and then, but she is, line break. She is beautiful, but she is beautiful. And yet, but she is, next line, starving. You know, just all of that to me was just such an amazing thing. Not that I think we actually talked about that when we first read it in that first class, but it, you know, these are the kinds of things that I learned from her. Each day she grows thinner, and her bones. That's also another incredible line break. Each day she grows thinner, and her bones, line break. Her bones grow thinner. But what she says is her bones grow longer, porous. And then we get the caption. The caption says she's going to starve to death that winter with millions of others. There's the facts. And then here we get, deep in her body, the ovaries let out her first eggs, golden as drops of grain. You know, connecting with the puberty, but also the imagination. And that last line, that her eggs are golden as drops of grain. You know, a lot of times my students see that as, well, this is like something positive in a way, but it's not, you know. Grain grows, but it needs nutrients to grow and to flourish, right? Otherwise,
Yeah.
it dries and it goes nowhere. So, you know, it's not golden in that sense. It's not, there's no future for this girl. She's going to die. There's no possibility. She will not have children, you know, even though this is happening. And it's, you know, it's just the ending is another thing that Sharon Olds is often really, really good at, is her endings. And of course, you know, the metaphorical aspect of it. And I often use The Poet's Companion in creative writing classes. I love that little book so much. And one of the things they say, and they begin almost immediately with a poem of Sharon Olds also, and they say that they believe she has a simile machine in her basement, you know, because,
can I have one?
Yeah, really. She's the queen, you know, of similes and metaphors. But you know, what's interesting about this poem is it actually doesn't have as many of her poems do. Sometimes there'll be half a dozen or more in one poem, one short poem. But this one actually doesn't have so many, except at the very end, that very last line, which is kind of secretly, you know, devastating, really, and sad.
When she says hunger and puberty are taking her, you know, that's so haunting, because the way hunger takes you is to death.
Yes.
And puberty takes you to life. You know, like,
Yes.
once you start to go through puberty, you're developing into a young person, and you go through all of these changes, these body changes. I was actually looking at pictures of my son, and I remember he was always very skinny and wiry, and then puberty hit, and he gained a lot of weight, and I was startled. And my friend says, "Oh, don't worry, happens to all of them," you know. So, and you know, he had a few years where he was heavier, and then he grew out of it.
Right.
But I didn't want to make any presumptions anyway. But so I have that experience with him, you know, that you sort of go through puberty. But with her, she starts puberty, which was taking her one place, but hunger was taking her someplace else.
Right. Right.
And what I find especially haunting is that this image is presented, I'm sure it was in the news, you know, and the poem is presented, we're there with her at that moment where she's sitting on the hard ground. And I think everybody sat on hard ground and been uncomfortable. You're like, wow, this is really hard. You know, so
Right.
even that line makes me feel that
Yeah.
hard ground.
Yeah.
And so we're reading about this and we're connecting with her. And yet the caption says she's already gone.
Yeah.
So this person that we're so empathizing with in this moment, there's no hope because she's already gone.
Right. Right.
And like to present her fully in life,
Yes.
you know, between those two forces of puberty and hunger is really powerful and amazing.
Yes.
So I've heard of her, Sharon Olds, but I haven't read her a lot.
Oh yeah.
So I'm gonna get this book though. I'm not gonna get the collective of, because those are fine, but I like the actual books. Those are what I
Right. Well,
prefer.
I highly recommend her first 3 books. Satan Says was her first one, award-winning immediately. This was her second one, also. I think this is the Lamont Poetry Selection for 1983.
Very
And
good year.
yes, yes. And then her third one, called The Gold Cell. And, you know, because there weren't a lot of poetry majors in the MFA, I took that first workshop, and then there weren't a lot of poetry workshops. And I was in the program for about 5 years. The last year was I'd gotten my full-time job and I was mostly working on my thesis. But I had to do a few independent studies. Mostly I think I did them with John Dufresne, uh, and one time he had like a small group. There were like 5 of us. I don't know if that was actually, it might have been a class. It was very small, but otherwise we did independent studies. And so I would choose books you know, in addition to working on my own poems with him, I would choose books to study and discuss with him. And that's what he had me do. So I did the first 3 of Sharon Olds' books, and they were just amazing. I may have done Mary Oliver book also, I think at one point, but I was just really, I really, really studied her. And you know, I can't say, you know, I feel like I have continued to improve because of her, to develop and evolve because of her. But I remember at my thesis defense, Jim Hall saying to me, okay, you've got the description down, you describe really well your imagery and all of that. Now you need to loosen it up and throw in a little bit more of the abstract occasionally. So I hadn't quite, I guess, mastered, you know, all of it yet. But he gave me some good advice you know, I was always so sort of focused on describing things like form and function, you know, which she does. She has poems about making love that when you read it, it sounds like you're making love, you know, or running or something like that. I was really sort of, I guess, more focused on stuff like that. And but you know, I have to credit her, even though I don't read her as much as I used to. But I actually, listening to Julie's session, I think she mentioned her, and that's what came to my mind, that's what I wanted to do. And so I've been rereading her in the last couple of weeks, and I'm going to go back to a lot of it. Yeah, she's really
That's
amazing.
that's what I think is so valuable about reading poetry. And I tell my students this, and a lot of them don't quite understand. I say it's really important to read, as
Oh,
pretty much
sorry.
the most important thing you can do. And I
Yeah, of
can tell who reads and who doesn't.
course,
Um,
of course.
and it's not a matter of, you know, who's reading for the class. It's
Right, right.
who reads, because for me, when I'm writing, I don't write well unless I'm reading.
Of course,
Um,
absolutely. Yeah.
and I have like my little Atwood book, who knows, it's,
Hmm.
you know, I just move it from table to table. And if I have to read something, especially if I don't feel like it, like if I've got to write a book review or I don't know, I'm under deadline to write something.
Right.
I will just pick, there's this one poem in there and I will just read it.
Exactly.
And that'll give me my fuel,
And that's what it
to,
is.
to
It's
get
that
going.
fuel, and one thing I do with students, and I did a workshop, one of the workshops I did using our grabbed anthology. I did a workshop at the North Campus, which is also the North Broward County Library. We share a library with them. And in fact, I'm doing a workshop, I think it's in February again. They have a great day for writers with workshops. It's completely free up at the Coconut Creek campus. And but once I decided, I guess after the book had the anthology had come out, I designed a workshop where I grabbed, first lines of several of the poems in there. And after, we looked at some and everything, but I had the students pick a first line and write from that first line and had them write. And then we looked at some of their work and so many of them just took that given line and just took off with it and were able to go with that. And I can't tell you, I mentioned the Lee Young Lee, whom I discovered at FIU when he came to read. I had never heard of him. And after he came to FIU, I was just blown away and have all his books and studied him. And I remember reading this one poem of his, and it just started this long poem that has become like a centerpiece poem for me. And well, it is the centerpiece poem in my chapbook, and that has happened, with other ones also, with other times. And I also, I read a lot of fiction. I read, some nonfiction as well, but I prefer fiction and poetry. But I don't start writing without reading something. It's like I have to. And I think it's something, it's a really great tool to give to students, also if they'll take it. Sometimes I'll make the whole class everybody is going to begin with this line. And that's what, and with the exact line, you don't even change it.
Right.
And just to show them what that can do for you. It's something that's really, just to get especially, with reading, it just suddenly, like it did with that Lee Young Lee, it just gives you that key, that key to start, it connects with your memory, your image, and it just gives you that key to keep going. And I suppose, you could get rid of that if it doesn't work for you or something, at some point, but it gets you into it. And I think that's, something that's really valuable and helpful.
Yeah, Julie calls part of the process invitations, so that when you read different things, you find different invitations into your own world.
Yeah.
And for me, hearing this Sharon Olds, because I'm a visual artist as well, so I love images, and I have a whole career as a graphic designer, so it's a combination of words and images.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea that you could take an image like this that doesn't have a direct personal connection to you and then create something from that. Because
Yes.
to be honest, like I have trouble doing ekphrastic poetry, like looking at a painting and coming up with something for whatever reason.
Yes.
But I think photographs are different, and I have used them in my class before.
Yes.
So, I'm very curious, and now I'm excited to like pick up some of these books, and to read them. And it's August So I am sort of doing the Sealy challenge of I'm looking
I
at a
heard, I
poetry
saw
book.
you were doing that. Yeah.
I'm not reading the whole thing because
Okay.
I'm preparing for a new class. I have a lot of editorial work I'm doing, but I'm looking at the book
Can you
every
explain what the Sealy
day.
challenge is?
This daily challenge is basically to read a poetry collection every day. And it's possible with poetry books to read the whole thing every day, but
Yeah.
I unfortunately I just don't have the time to do that.
Right.
But I think that it's been really valuable as I go back into my books and I take a look at some of the books that I love and some of the books I haven't gotten to yet. And I'm like, oh well, let me take a look at this and um, read a poem here quickly. So it's
Right.
definitely added something
Right.
um, to my August days. So
And
now I'm
it's
going to talk
they're books of
about
your own choosing. They're books of your own
yeah,
choosing. Yeah.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Um, as my dog reorients herself. Um, so I'm going to talk about my choice,
Yes.
and my choice is by Ada Limón from The Carrying. And I
Lovely.
had the pleasure of hearing her read this poem.
Mm.
And it's a funny story behind her reading because I'm friends with another poet and he loves to schedule everything. So he's like, well, I'd love to get together. How about, I remember the exact April 16th, and it was like a month or 6 weeks out. And I'm like, yeah, sure. you know?
Yeah.
And so then he got back in touch. He's like, oh, we have a problem. He's like, Ada Limon's reading. And I'm like, and so you scheduled me 6 weeks ago. He's like, well, let's go together, it'll be a lot of fun. So I didn't really know a lot about her at that point. I did read some of her, but so the poem is called The Last Thing that she read. So the last thing. First, there was the blue wing of a scraggly loud jay tucked in the shrubs. Then the bluish black moth drunkenly tripping from blade to blade. Then the quiet that came in roaring like the R.J. Corman over Broadway near the RV shop. These are the last three things that happened, not in the universe, but here in the basin of my mind, where I'm always making a list for you, recording the day's minor urchins, silvery dust mote, pistachio shell, the dog eating a sugar snap pea. It is going to rain soon, close clouds bloated above us, the air like a net about to release all the caught fishes, a storm siren in the distance. I know you don't always understand, but let me point out the first wet drops landing on the stones, the noise like fingers drumming the skin. I can't help it. I will never get over making everything such a big deal. So
Wow.
when I heard that last line, I'll read it again.
Yes.
I can't help it. I will never get over making everything such a big deal. First of all, I was startled. And I leaned over to my poet friend and I said, that's me, because I'm highly dramatic. But also, what immediately occurred to me after that is how could she end a poem like that? We're told not to end poems like that.
Right.
And he said, she earned it because
Exactly.
of all of the imagery that she has above. And if you read her, she does this. She will just absolutely pepper the poem with all kinds of beautiful tactile imagery. And then she'll just end it like ba-boom. She'll just make like a statement.
Yes.
There's another one about it's a little animal, I forget, it's like a groundhog or something, and she just ends it, she's trying to survive, like just no imagery, boom,
I think I've
statement.
read that one. Yeah. Yes.
And to me, this poem was really important for a couple of reasons. Because to me, the way that I am, like so highly dramatic and everything is so important, I'll be like, oh, well, look at this feather I just found. It's perfectly white. And it's just, and the next person's like, okay, yeah, it's a feather.
Right.
That's great. You know, so it's sort of like as she's looking over these small things that are so important and she draws attention to, and she
Yes.
can't help making everything such a big deal. To me, it was like, you're okay, so continue on with making everything a big deal. But then
Absolutely.
also, it's an invitation to say, you know what, the way that you're taught to make a poem, and that the last line should be an image, like leave
Right.
them with an image. It
Right.
doesn't have to be that.
Right.
So she's doing something in a different way that's uniquely hers. Um, so that blew my mind.
Absolutely.
And I have not done this. Though maybe I have. I do have this one poem about my mother and I seeing a hammerhead, and I sort of end it, where I say, um, you know, I did do it. And I credited Ada. I said after Ada Limón. Um, because I said something like, my mother had ate shark once and said she didn't like it. So that was the end of the poem, which is not very poetic, but I had built in the poem all of this imagery, and I ended
Absolutely.
it boom boom.
You
You
had earned
know,
it. You had earned it.
hopefully, hopefully I earned it. It's published, so um,
Well,
but
I, you know, I feel that that's me as well. My family would say, "Oh yeah, that's you." Like I drive them crazy. I'm like, "Are you looking at this tree? Do you see this leaf?" I mean, I have ashtrays full of stones in my house, little rocks that I find, or I'll collect leaves because I go for walks a lot lately. A lot. I need it physically and mentally. So I'm just looking and looking and looking, and I feel like I do, she's listing in there. I like, that's something I'm very, very big with. And I love the basin of the mind, this, and it's like she is in our heads, or we are in our heads because of this. And these are all the things that are going on. And yeah, we think that these are big deals. And the other day I was like, look, they say it's really important to acknowledge trees, because I have like this tree obsession with trunks and trees, and I have so many pictures. I've written about them when I had to do an acrostic exercise for like a workshop I was invited to do, and everyone's choosing all this different artwork, and I like chose the photograph of the tree trunk. That's what spoke to me. But also, this thing, one of the things she does is, which I really like, and was something that one of my professors also taught me to do, was your writing. And also I learned it I remember in a workshop with Marie Howe, where she was saying, okay, write about this, now write about this, now write about this. And so you were describing something, but now grab from something from yesterday or whatever. She does that third thing after the listing, which it will rain soon. Now you're over here, and yeah, she's going to come back to listing, but she moves you to the side of that. And just saying things, you don't always understand. I can't help it. I mean, all of these things they seem rather abstract, right? And I mean, I do, a lot of times I will tell students, if you don't know how to end, find an image, try to end on an image. But this And we also tell them to avoid cliche lines, right? Like you said, we're told, such a big deal. That would be something that we might not use, but yes, she's absolutely earned it here. Absolutely earned it. I have this real listy poem, food poem of my mother cooking and recipes and describing like all of these things, and then at the end, I have something like, but if, after everybody's eaten and gone to bed and all this, but if you get up, if you wake up and come into the kitchen bleary eyed, half awake or whatever, she will offer you a bowl, a plate, a taste of something. And I remember thinking, I would never end with a taste of something. That's just as like something, that is not a concrete word, and or an image. But I felt like I could do that with that one, I felt like I could do that. And that's what she, that's a wonderful poem. I have to go read it again.
Well, I'll send it to you.
Oh, dude, thank you.
The poem is also, to me, it's very personal because she's speaking about her husband, and she talked about the poem after, that this is what she's doing. She's looking at all these things, the smallness of these things, and he comes home from work and she'll share with him what happened. But to me, it's also about the process of poetry, because this is what we do.
Yeah.
We look at small things.
Right.
And we bring it together and we give it as a gift to other people who might not be looking at it this way. And like she says, I know you don't always understand.
Yes.
So as a reader, I don't always understand, but poets are bringing me to an understanding based on what they're giving me. So they're bringing me a new type of understanding.
Yeah.
And I think it's true for us poets that we cannot stop making everything such a big deal.
It gives you new eyes, and I feel like poets give us new eyes. They give us, they expand our heart. They expand everything, things that we're not aware of. That's what writers do. Yeah.
And to me, poetry has a license to play with language in a way that traditional prose, traditional fiction and nonfiction does not. Now we have hybrid, which I love hybrid, it's like bread, which I'm just content to call it hybrid and without really labeling it. I know a lot of some journals, I have some hybrid pieces and they're like, oh my, we just don't even know. We can't have poetry things in the nonfiction section. It just can't. But I'm like, why not?
Right. I mean,
it's just words. It's not going to hurt you.
I read Toni Morrison for her language. I mean, this is someone I even read like Garcia Marquez or definitely Toni Morrison. I read for the language, and because to me there is so much poetic language. I don't care so much about plot, it's just the language. And there's a book called Furious Versions. I think that's what it's called. Yes. And that is by a poet. It's written, I think she's a Canadian poet. Let's see, Furious Versions.
Just give me a second.
Yeah.
My headphones have died, I think.
Okay.
Well, on that note, since this is going to take some fixing and we're recording this wonderful session, I'm just going to end it because my son is also looming.
Of course.
Wanting his breakfast.
not his breakfast, which he already had, like the king he is, his birthday lunch. So I'm just gonna thank you so much.
Of course,
for
of course.
joining
You can just
me
edit out
with
all that
this.
last part. Yeah.
And be sure to check out our bios, which are going to be listed under the podcast information. And keep reading poetry and loving poetry just like we do. So thank you so much, Elisa.
Oh, my pleasure.
I'll see you around the way because we're both South Florida poets. So thank you, and bye-bye.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.